welcome to Angel's Nook. Today we're going to be refreshing these chairs and bringing them back to a much better look. I love the shape of them. I had been hunting for a while for new chairs for our kitchen table, and when I saw these I knew they were perfect. They're English Windsor, so the style would have been in the first half of the 1800s, and they are all different kinds of backs on them, but one of the things that is unique is that the seats are always what is called a saddle seat. It has a curve, raise, and a curve, so that when you sit in them, even with no cushion in them, they're incredibly comfortable. And that's one of the things that I loved about it. They have leather put into the seats over the wood. It's a very thin layer. I've already cleaned 2 of these chairs and was pretty shocked with how much effort it took to clean them. The back of the wood chairs, the wood part of the chairs, has been pretty easy to clean up with the deglosser. But the leather section, I have no idea what happened to it over time. If somebody tried putting shoe polish on it, I don't know. But it's requiring a scrub brush to get all the grime off of it. And then it comes down to a splotchy, very light colored leather that I do not believe is the color that was originally there. I think the stain just wore off of the leather over time. But these are a set of vintage chairs, and they're going to look a whole lot better when we get done with them. But I did want you to see, they ranged from this seat here, which is fairly brown in its covering, to very splotchy, almost yellowy. One of the chairs came almost completely cream when I got it clean. The other one is still splotchy, but I'm going to be able to fix that with stain, and I'm going to walk you through the steps with it. But right now we're going to show you what I do with something that needs this much cleanup. I don't use the wipes. I use a green Scotch-Brite Scrubby with no sponge on it and paper towels to wipe it back. This is probably, the seats on these are the worst cleanup I've had. So I'm actually, besides the grime that you could tell initially was grime, I think there's also just whatever somebody put on there trying to stain it and bring it back. One of the things that you can do, I usually pour deglosser into a bowl to work with it, so that I'm not getting gunk back into my whole can of deglosser. But this was an empty can of deglosser that I keep, that I can pour some into it, pour enough of what I need, use it, and then I can discard the little bit that's left, because the deglosser is really inexpensive. And this is the brush that I wound up using to clean this. But when you're using the deglosser and the green scrubby, you just dip in an end and start scrubbing. You don't have to brush it on. You don't have to let it sit unless you've got a bunch of grease. It does not need to sit. If you've got an old finish, you're probably going to wind up with some of that finish coming off. But if your surface squeaks when you pull 4 fingers firmly across it, it's clean and ready to go. This part of cleaning was not bad. And when you wipe off, don't use cheap paper towels. You'll waste more, and you'll actually spend more money with them than using a good paper towel like Bounty that will absorb and not tear as you're cleaning the deglosser off. If you see some of the finish come off, it's because the finish was degrading, because the deglosser is only a cleaner. And the same thing would have happened if you were using just soap and water. So don't mistake, as some people do, and think that the deglosser is a stripper. It is not. It is a degreaser, and it also etches the surface with micro etching so that whatever you're putting on it, whether it's stain or paint, in my case with these, I'm going to be using stain. To start with, I just want to get some all over it because this steep does need to soak. And I know that from having done 2 other chairs already. And with my hands, 2 chairs was all I could do in a day. And I know from doing the other 2 chairs that I have to leave deglosser down in those edges. Some of you are probably going to think, this isn't leather, that's vinyl, that's why that's coming off. It's not. I found a loose edge underneath one of the chairs, and it's definitely leather. It's thin leather, but it's leather. I've never had to use a scrub brush on anything before with the deglosser. But just the green scrubby wasn't doing it, and the wipes definitely were not getting whatever this is off. That right there is primarily just dirt. From years, I'm assuming, of it not being cleaned. I'm not going to make you stay with me for this because I already know this is going to take me a minimum of an hour to get all the grime off of this. And the bottom will not take any longer than this top back did. And sometimes that's just what you run into, and you just have to clean until it's ready to go. These have had the gluing and clamping done to get all the joints back solid that had any issues. And I've also removed from the bottom of all of these some really nasty stick-on felt feet. Don't use those things. If you need feet on the bottom of a piece of furniture, use the thin plastic ones. They come in either black or white or just metal. The felt gets so nasty. There's no way. These were gross getting them off. But anyway, what I'm going to do now is I've got a mix of 1.5 parts provincial to 1 part walnut that I had mixed up for a couple of other recent projects that are actually in the area where these chairs are going to be, and it's really close to the finish on the table that these chairs are going to be sitting around. So all I really want to do with this finish is to bring the tone into the other woods in my kitchen and to refresh this finish. So I'm going to be using a cloth, an old piece of t-shirt, and when you're doing something like a chair, do the legs first and do it upside down so that you can easily get into all of the pieces. When I get as much of this as I can see clearly done, then I'm going to have Jim flip the chair up for me so that I can double check the fronts and any areas that I can't see, and to double check that I have gotten it on smooth on these areas. And you want to do it pretty quickly because the stain starts to dry pretty quickly. It's not going to dry like the paint, but it's going to dry enough that it can get sticky and gloppy if you don't work with it quickly. So that's where we're headed with this. I'm going to get a little bit onto my cloth here. I've got 2 fingers wrapped. I don't want it really heavy because I want to see how this applies. And I did not want it put on with a brush. I didn't want it that heavy. I do need a little bit more on here. I'm dabbing there because that's an indent that has had some damage that I did not see, but it's on the underneath. I can go around this to fill, but then I need to smooth. You're probably not going to see a huge amount of change on this because all I'm seeking to do with it is just to refresh the finish. And you kind of get, as you're applying it, you can figure out how much you need to put on to get the look that you need. Even though I can feel this as I'm going around it, I'm going to want to check it when it sets upright to make sure I haven't skipped anywhere or that I don't have it going in the wrong direction for the grain lines. If I wanted to totally change this, I would still do this thin coat and then come back and do a second thin coat, no matter what color of the stain that I'm using. I am not going to touch the leather right now. I just want to work on all the wood because the leather is going to be a slightly different color and I've got to work on it differently. So I want all of this to have had its coat of stain and dry before I start working on this. You want to stay going the direction of the grain. So once you've applied it, even if you have to go in a curve around something, go back and straighten out with the last swipes so that you are getting it finished back with the grain. And move around as you need to make sure that you're doing that and that you're getting all the areas. And a cloth gives you the most control when you're doing this. You can always have a dry cloth handy. So if you need to wipe something up, something gets where you don't want it, it's too heavy, you work fast, applying it in tight places like this. You have enough time to go back and smooth out the stain. If you get really picky with how you're putting it on in this spot, we're going to do it. The last swipes to even anything on here is a very, very light touch. It's not a hard touch to start with, but it's super light if I'm going back to smooth. That's exactly what's going to be done to the other 3 chairs off camera, and let them dry well before I start on the seat. Hopefully you can now see a more even finish on this one that I have stain on than on this one, which is in its original finish. It's not a huge change in the color, but this color is darker, which is like my table in the kitchen, and this finish has a lot of dings and wear, and now this one will be smooth and even. And the bottom is exactly the same way, we just can't get a good angle on it for you. This chair had the darkest tone of the leather once it was fully cleaned. The chairs have dried overnight, and I looked over all of them and went back and did touch up any place where I saw that I had not had finish. Always do that, because even in the best light, you're going to find some spot that you missed. But let it completely dry. If you see it, say an hour after you painted it, stained it, and you go, oh, I need to touch that up right now. Don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. Because it's gonna leave lap lines, it's gonna leave a splotchy spot, but if you let it dry completely, you can go over it just like I was going over with the cloth wrapped around my finger the first time, blending it all out, and you won't see it. So those have all been done. And I experimented with this seat because since it is the darkest one of the seats to start with, all the other seats have to match it. That's the easiest way to go about it, because it was going to take stain very differently. So I did the staining underneath to test it to see if that was the color I wanted. And I'm using tobacco on the seats because I want some contrast between the seat and the leather. I want those to be not looking like it all flows together like it did originally on the darkest seat before it was cleaned. Once this has dried 24 hours, I put some spotting marks in here because I wanted this to look like worn leather. If you wanted to coat leather and have it look just solid, brand new leather, you wouldn't do the technique that I'm going to be showing you. But I wanted the leather to be aged looking and look like these have been around for a long time, well cared for, but have been around, that they don't look new at this point. There's going to be things done with the nail heads as well. But after this dries completely, I'm going to glaze it with 1 part tobacco and 1 part mineral spirits with just a very, very light coat to even everything out, but you'll still be able to see the darks and lights on the seat, which is what I'm looking for. Normally, I would be doing the underneath of the chair first, but when I show you what I'm going to do, but because I have a few places on the top edges of these chairs that are still drying from the touch-up I did a couple of hours ago, I'm just going to show you the top of the seat. But on the underneath, if I had tested the stain and decided, oh, that's not the color stain I want, it's not going to work, I could have taken mineral spirits and immediately taken it right back off. But so far, I'm liking the progression of this, and I will show you what I'm going to do to try to match up the lighter seats with this. I'm using a very, very small piece of t-shirt so that I can keep control. I can keep it from dragging on this. And I also have the chair seat that I just showed you right here against this so that I can look back and forth and I can see if I am matching this. That's super important with this. And because this is so light here, I may wind up having to do 2 coats in this area to try to get all of this to match. I'm hoping not. We'll just have to see how it goes as I apply it over here. I'll also be working with it in a specific order so that I don't, as I'm coming up over this, I don't wind up with stain all over me, or at least that's the goal. The stain was stirred well off camera, and you're always going to get just a little bit, and it's like, okay, why are you doing this instead of a brush? Because I have a lot of control with this fabric to be able to blend. If I put this on with a brush and then I go back and try to blend, I'm going to have more stain on this than I want for the effect that I want to do. By using the cloth, I can put it on lighter in some areas, darker in some areas, and blend those edges together to make it work. I'll be dipping a lot because I will be getting a little bit on the cloth at a time. I'm wiping very lightly with my finger. This is not a scrubbing. I'm going back and forth a lot because I can see here very clearly if I have it blended or not. I'm not worried about this front edge yet, even though it's going to need a lot of work. You'll see why when I reach the point that I want to work on it. I'm not trying for solid color. I want an aged look. And leather that is aged is not solid. I'm keeping the cloth wrapped up between my fingers so it's not sticking to any of this or dragging any of it off. If you rub hard, you're going to lift the stain right back off. It's more time consuming this way, but believe me, you get a better effect. And you start with your first tap down with your finger away from where you have already added stain, so that you don't get areas that are splotchy with too much stain that you can't blend out. To get a darker coating with this, doing it this way, I'm using a lighter touch as I blend. And that allows me to leave more behind. Right there shows you if I wiped that tight, what would happen. Very little stain sticks. And this here is too heavy. So by having it on my fingertip, I can even that out by how hard I wipe and how I blend. If you applied it with a brush, you could get a thicker coat on here, but I'm also dealing with the grain of the leather, which is more pronounced in this than, say, the new couches and all that we buy that are leather. Now to get the spots that I created into the other one, the other chair. I'm using the tip of my finger, actually the back side with my fingernail, to create these into this. And now I'm going to take a cleaner spot of the cloth and just tamp those down to mute them. The last thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to leave a fair amount of stain on my cloth, and I'm going to pounce it. My finger's going back and forth. I want to make sure I get down in that crack, but I don't want so much that I'm creating a big ridge or a big line of dark stain on here. Jim, can you get me a paper towel with mineral spirits on it? I'm just not liking that spot and I want to fix it. It just needs to, part of it damp with it and part of it dry. Or just a dry paper towel is probably safer. I don't want it wet, I just want it enough that I can pull it back up. Oh. This is damp, not sopping wet, so I can pull this back off where it got too heavy. When I went back and tried to repair it, I should have left it alone and let it dry, just like I told you guys. But I didn't, so that's the price I paid. So now, I'm going to try to blend that in. And here on the front, where that's lapping. And the effort that it's taking to try to get this put back together is exactly why you shouldn't have done, I shouldn't have done what I did. I should have just let it drop it. No, I'm going to leave it alone. Even though there's some places I can see that I would think about doing something with, I'm not going to. But if we can, I don't think I can, maybe I can turn this. These are very close to the same color. So what will happen is when I apply the glaze over this one, I will apply it a little thicker than over that one. And that will be what finishes bringing these pieces together. Working on the underneath of these chairs to get the leather that is wrapped underneath, I figured out what I wanted to do to finish off these chairs. So instead of a glaze, I added a layer using the sponge piece of it, and you'll see that close up in a minute. We've got the lights turned down in the shop right now to prevent glare, to let you see. The chair over here is finished, the one on the far side. This one still has to be completed. I originally put the striations in the chair purposely. When you sit down, your bottom scoots back. That's where you can make lines of wear in leather. And I was also trying to help camouflage what happens when you've got a really uneven surface, but you don't want to put the stain on like paint. So the far chair is completely finished, and it has the aged look that I wanted. And I've done a second chair that was lighter to make sure that what I was going to show you on camera was going to match up. So what you see me do on this chair in just a minute is exactly what I did to the original darkest chair and to another chair. So I have this one and another one to finish, but I'm going to show you one. I'm going to try to keep my head out of the way of the camera, but I have to be able to look down from the top down on this to make sure that what I'm doing is going to match the other chair. So we're going to move that chair that's finished out of the way. We're going to put a light back on so that you can actually see up close what I'm doing. I'm using 1/4 of a true applicator. I made sure that I cut it so that they are still attached together. Actually, if you had wanted to do this in a solid finish with the stain, the true applicator works really well in odd shapes as opposed to a foam stain brush, to have good control and not have to go exactly where a brush will take you. So I'm going to work on this the same way that I did the other chair. I'm putting it on in a swirl motion, and it's not super thick, but it is not super thin either, like I did when I was working with the first part. The only reason I'm swirling this is because I'm looking to create an aged look on this leather. I would not do that if I were staining a cabinet or a piece of furniture. I would not do it that way. just a little bit more stain. Thought I had enough for this seat. It's a little bit lighter than the other seat was. And now I'm going to start pouncing, going different directions to blend out those swirls. And it's a very, very light pounce. It's even lighter than if you're pouncing to do the Heirloom Traditions paint. And I'm going to keep working it, doing this until I have a mottled look and no actual swirls. If I just pounced in rows, it would not work. You would literally have rows. I've got to get into a different light to see what I've got. That area right there, I need it a little bit more. Actually, this side is easier for me to see the light in. And if I had just put some on here and just started pouncing, I would just have pounce marks and no full layer on this. And now that one's done. When you have nail heads on something, whether it's a sofa, it's a chair, it's just a decorative piece on, it can't even be on wood that nail heads have been put in. These pieces here, that's the very last thing that you want to put any paint on. And in this case, I'm going to be using antiquing gel. I keep a mix for myself that's 2 parts of the HTP gold and 1 part champagne. That gives me exactly an antique gold, or depending on what it's against, it can look like antique brass, but it's a color I really like. There are nail heads all the way around the front of this and all around the edge of this, holding the leather onto this chair and keeping it from pulling loose or getting worn. It actually kind of blocks you a little bit here so that the leather doesn't get scraped off on the front, because it's a thin piece of leather on each of these chairs. Before you ever try to paint nail heads, it sounds silly, but print out a paper with open circles the size of your nail heads, and I don't care what color paint you use, practice with a brush filling those in, because your hand doesn't know how to do it until you've done it with a brush. And you're going to see that I don't do brush strokes. I'm going to be doing a stippling method with it to do it. A brush like this, which is an art brush, a round art brush, is the best thing. And you want an art brush. Craft brushes are very stiff bristles. This is a firm bristle, but it's soft. It's malleable. It lets me twist to get into places. It's got a good tip on it. You don't have to spend a fortune on it, but get a decent brush from one of the hobby stores. Don't pick one up that comes with a paint kit for kids. In fact, with my own children, I threw all those brushes out so they never had them, because it will make you think you can't paint if you try to paint with one of those. But you're going to see the process, and how I work on these and how I work on these is a little bit different. You have to think about too that you don't want your hand dragging through where you've already been. So I'm right-handed, so I'm going to start from the left side, working over. If you were left-handed, you would start on this side and come back. Make sure you have a place to brace your hands and you're not worried about getting into previous paint because you're always working away from it. The antiquing gel has been stirred off camera, and I'm going to start on this one and show you the technique of what happens and how you work through these. You barely touch the end of the paintbrush into the antiquing gel, and in fact I got a little bit too much there because I was trying to tip it where you could see. Start on the center of the nail head and let this kind of brush, as you push, you actually are pushing the paint out toward the edge and you're pouncing it. If I did a brush stroke on it, I would have thin marks on it. The other thing you do not have to do, you're not trying to get all the way down to the edge of that nail head. Nail heads are always in shadow, so you want to have it in a circle on the top. You don't want a lopsided blob on there, but you also aren't trying to get to the bottom, because what will happen is you'll create pools around this, you'll create smears on your leather. Do keep a wet paper towel handy, so if you have to, you can completely remove the antiquing gel if you have a bad bobble. You'll see that as I continue to work on this, I won't have to go back and re-dip. My brush does not have paint worked into all the bristles yet. This is tedious. I've already done 2 chairs and I had to take a break. My eyes needed a break and my hips needed a break. I'm not standing to do this. Your body needs to be still. If I were standing or even kneeling, I would start to wobble and it would push my brush. My hand has to be braced. My arm is actually braced here so that I can work the brush and I have full control over the brush. And I have it tipped so that I can see clearly what I am doing. As I'm putting the paint in the center and I push the bristles down, that's actually pushing the paint with the brush so that I don't have to try to wrap around this to get this fully painted. And pouncing the brush keeps from having strokes in there. And go back and look while you're still within 2 or 3 of the nail heads. Look at it and see, is there someplace I missed? Is there someplace it's thin? It's not going to take long for me to get into a position here that it's going to be harder for me to keep my hand out of the way of the camera. But I'm going to need to be able to see what I'm doing so that I don't get antiquing gel where I do not want it. When you're doing something like this, the reason that I did this part of the nail heads first, you should have been able to see I was leaning against the front and against these sides with my hand overlapping, and you run the risk of just smearing things. If I had done this edge first, I would have had to wait for it to dry in order to safely get the nail heads up here. You have to think about those things. Again, I'm starting on this side and going this way because I'm right-handed. If you were left-handed, you would start on the other side. But by starting on this side, I can leave my little finger up here to brace my hand and work on all of these pieces. And as I'm moving, I'm not going to smear anything. I'm always going to have wet paint in front of me instead of where my hand might be swiping over. I'm not going to go the whole way around this. I'm just going to let you see that it is just a little bit different. Well, that was good. Got the brush back now. It's a little bit different in how you're positioning to work when you're on the side pieces, but it's still the same process. I washed the brush in between too. The brush, because you're putting so little on it and you're working relatively slowly, the antiquing gel starts to gum up in the upper part of the brush, and you don't want that because you need the brush to be supple so that you can control the movement and the pounce of it. And you might be able to see a little bit easier on these side pieces how I'm pushing the paint from the center out with the brush. It's still a pouncing movement, but it's pushing the paint in front. Once you've done it, you'll see how it works. I can also brace the heel of my hand here, but the little finger still helps to get the first parts of this, and then just making sure like my hand is leaning up here so that I'm not bouncing around. Free-handing out without having someplace to brace is where you will start to have the paintbrush go where you don't want it to go. And avoid overloading the brush, especially when you're working on the sides like this, because it will tend, if it's overloaded, it will tend to try to run because of the viscosity of the antiquing gel. And just like on the top, if I see a spot while I'm still here within 2 or 3 that needs a little bit more on it, I want to do it before I move on. And that's what's going to happen all the way around this. I'm going to finish the last chair, and then we'll look at all the chairs together and one last step that I think is going to be needed on these nail heads. Plans can often change as you're working on something. As you experiment, you layer, you do different things, you figure out ultimately what the final piece is going to look like. I've often heard, and I agree that it's true, let the piece talk to you. When things are going well and looking good, keep going with it. If something seems really off, step back, think about it, figure out, is it the colors? Is it the technique? What is it? To figure out what you want. I really thought when I put the antiquing gel on the nail heads that at least up here on the seats that I was going to have to do a really thin glaze of the tobacco over them to mute them down. But since I only put 1 coat of the antiquing gel on it, it's not a full solid coat. even though someone looking at it would think it is. It's got enough of the original darkness of those nail heads from where they had had a lot of finish and wear on them coming through the antiquing gel that it aged it perfectly without having to do a glaze. But that is something you can do. If something is too bright, the metal is too bright, whether it's on handles or nail heads, you can tone it down with either stain or antiquing gels. I'm really happy with how these came out. This chair is the chair that had the darkest leather coloring still left on it. This is the lightest chair before I started on them. And you can see they are a match. And that took playing with it, layering it, and I know the striations to begin with. You probably thought, she's making stripes, what's wrong with her? Is she trying to create wood? What's going on? But by layering the way I did, I got exactly the mottled look of the leather that I wanted. The seats and the rest of the chair do not need any more top coat. The top coat is in the stain and it's perfectly good to go right now. I'm going to live with these for a while. They came out just not quite as shiny as I thought I was going to like them, but I'm going to put them in my kitchen and live with them for a while. And if I want just a little bit more sheen with them and I don't want to add polyurethane over it and go to the effort of doing that, one of the things I may try in the future is to, pardon me, is to simply add a coat of the HTP furniture polish. And that will definitely bring it up just a notch in sheen without making it super shiny. If you put the polish on either a painted surface or a stained surface, you have to wait until it has cured for 30 days on either the oil-based or the water-based. So I hope you've learned something from this. I hope you've seen that you can make pieces match and you can make it fit the vision that you have. Taking the time is worth it, so thanks for joining us. Please like and subscribe and know that there are always links in our description for being able to get the products from HTP. Thanks for being here.